So we're talking today about a book, or actually, we're using this book to as reference for our talk. And the book is by Ekeocha Obianuju, and she is a biomedical scientist and the president of the Culture for Life. And in 2012, she wrote an open letter to Bill and Melinda, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, um, in which she was basically critiquing and telling, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a philanthropic organization. I'm pretty sure people know who that is, right? That them spending um, 4.6 billion to fund contraception was a bad idea. So this book is not necessarily. I don't want to say it's centered around that, right? It's sort of, but it's a main sort of a mainstay within her conversation about the book. So um, maybe we can start talking about like the introduction and get
Okay.
into that. Yeah. Um, I'll let you. Okay, I'll let you start. Yeah, I'll let you
Yeah,
start
yeah,
first.
man. So my take on the book is that she's kind of comparing and contrasting what the values of Africans are versus what values these NGOs want Africans to have.
Right.
You know, that
Right.
that Africans value the family, that
Right.
Africans value their communities.
Right.
They don't value air quotes reproductive rights.
Mhm.
They they don't value these things that we're taught from a very young age to appreciate in the West. These kind of like very abstract ideologies like uh like feminism, and then the obsession with markets that we have.
Mhm.
They tend to be more interested in people,
Mhm. Mhm.
which really is what the traditional Christian perspective has always been.
Right.
Has been to be more interested in family and in our communities and in other people.
Right. And so is that, are you saying that we're moving, that Western culture has moved into much more of a material realm, right? And we're trying to influence, the third world or African countries and other, third world countries to
Yeah.
adopt our sort of cultural nuances or our cultural values that we have in the 21st century, right? Now, in the book, in the introduction, she gives a sort of a description about, what it was like living in, or actually, she gives a description of what it was like for her parents and her parents' generation,
Mm,
um, coming up under British colonialism, right? And she talks about sort of this conception of, you know the European as sort of the saviors or the ones who come in to help and govern the country and stuff like that, right? And then she went into talking about how, as a when she came up, that had no longer been the story for Nigeria, right? Like, no, Nigeria was no longer under colonial control. And she talked about how Nigerians and in her generation, they were very optimistic about the future and like what people could do and all the achievements. They could go on to be scientists, doctors, lawyers, engineers,
mhm.
things like that, which is pretty. I heard this comedian one time. She was like, for Nigerians, the only thing you can become is either a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer. You can't be anything. You can't be anything else. That's the height. And even then, your parents won't get excited about it because that's what you should have been doing in the first place. So, you know, but yeah, I mean, these are the things that I mean, I've kind of come across just in general, when talking with people of African descent. You hear a lot of times like their main thing is education, right? Family values, you
Hmm.
know, you know, having, of course, having monetary success. You want to be financially stable, right? But it's not the core of their focus. Their main focus is, you know, the family unit, right? And how everyone can sort of grow. But I won't go into that too much. So yeah, so the first thing is that she talked about how her growing up with her, the same concepts and the same ideas of thinking about white people and like colonization wasn't in her. um that wasn't part of her experience, right? And this thing of getting an education and going on to have a fruitful life is very important, to Africans. But she talks about how, you know in the what started this off is sort of this idea of sort of aid, to Africa, that Africa was in need of aid because of poverty, because of famine, you know, and um, all of these things. And then she came in with this with um, she talked about this song, "We Are the World," right? That was sung by a number of people. I think Michael Jackson was in there too, and like Quincy
Hmm.
Jones or something like that. They had like a choir. This is back in like I want to say 1980s, 1990s, right?
Oh, it was definitely the 80s.
Yeah. And so and how that whole thing was sort of like really a hype, for giving a lot of aid and doing a lot of philanthropy in Africa, and how that led to sort of some of these things that she critiques, which is abortion, uh, what is it called, family planning,
Hmm.
right? Which is another thing I want to get into, because I'm not really uh, too sure about what that means. And she talked about that in one of her chapters, where she says, family planning is simple. It's a simple thing you can understand,
Hmm.
right? It's planning properly to have a family, right? But of course, to these NGOs and to a lot of these, philanthropic organizations, their decision is to control the population by using
Yeah.
contraception, right?
For them, family planning means less people.
Right, right. It means it means less people, right? And so, and since we're getting into that, bro, um, I had sent you this article, which is actually pretty recent, by Breitbart, and it came out November 17th. And it says, and I'll just read the first part. It says, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, released a report with great fanfare on Tuesday that estimated the world's population has passed 8 billion, with most of the growth occurring in low-income regions such as sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, let me read the next part too. The UN specifically advised Nigeria to bring its explosive population growth under control, arguing that its economy and health services cannot sustain such a large population. So that's of course exactly what she was talking about. She had also did a talk on BBC where she was talking with this anchor, and of course the anchor's remedy, or the anchor's solution to this problem was of course population control, or you
Hmm.
know contraception, right? And she was saying that is not the culture in which Africans you know um, are born into, right? This idea of contraception as a means of family planning, right? It's more so, properly planning for a family, right? The promotion of younger people to get an education, both girls and boys, right? Proper medical health care, right? Where people are not in positions where they're I guess they're having to make a decision like which one is better or worse, and things like that. A lot of different things, right? Economically and socially. That she's saying that that the West always turns back to this idea of contraception, right? That we should, that should be the remedy. And she's saying like, that's actually that'll just exacerbate the problem, right? Because what she found is that what comes out of this idea of family planning that they're talking about, it leads to, um, divorces, um, out of wedlock births, uh, you know, abortion, and greater, um, and a lesser ability to have, wealth and, you know, family structure, right? What I'm thinking here is like, what is the way to get people to actually listen to more stuff like this, or more stuff like what she's talking about, in terms of like how we were talking earlier, right? And I'm gonna shut up. Um, we were talking earlier about how,
Is very
when you
resource rich, right? Like
yeah,
very.
is resource rich, but what I was getting at was,
So in particular, this the United Nations Population Fund report that Breitbart article
yeah,
refers to, it's flashing the warning signal, saying danger, danger, danger. The world is at its population limits, and we can't house more people on this planet.
mhm,
And that's the message that's being propagated by every egghead out there that's hostile toward the human person, and and the thing is, that is the position that the most of us average people, we're in direct opposition to it, because they're not saying that the world needs fewer people like them,
mhm,
like people that are credentialed, to have a bunch of degrees, that
right,
are self-proclaimed experts. They're not saying the world needs fewer of them. They're
right,
saying that the world needs fewer people like us, that are the
right,
people that are the lowly people down on the ground that go and shop at Walmart and stuff. You know,
right, right,
now I do want to bring up that there was an economist that lived in the 1800s named Thomas Malthus,
okay,
and I'm sure that we've all probably heard the term Malthusian economics.
yes,
And Thomas Malthus was the brain dead egghead of the 1800s that really popularized the idea that planet Earth cannot house any more than about 1 billion people. I think
okay,
it was 1 billion. It may have been less than that, but
mhm,
he was flashing on the warning signs, and all the eggheads of his day said, "Oh, you know what? We have to listen to him." So he was the one that a lot of the people, that were publicly financing the neutering of other human beings,
mhm,
saying if you're poor, then you shouldn't be allowed to have children. That was a
mhm,
movement. The eugenics movement in the United
mhm,
States and in Europe. Um, they looked at Thomas Malthus's warning of,
mhm,
that planet Earth can't handle any more people. She's at her breaking point. The thing is, he and all those eugenicists were all proven wrong, because they were saying the Earth couldn't house any more than 1 billion people. The Earth couldn't feed any more than 1 billion people. Well, guess what? We have about 8 billion people on the planet today,
right,
and things aren't perfect, but we're
mhm,
doing okay.
right, right,
So what these people are arguing is, they're saying that the Earth cannot, according to this report, they're saying that by 2050 the Earth's population may approach, I think, 9 billion. They said,
mhm,
and they're saying that is the reason that we need more family planning, which
mhm,
is just their fancy term for more contraception and more abortions in
mhm,
Africa,
mhm,
because the continent of Africa is the one that is growing the fastest. I think
right,
in that article they said that the average woman in Nigeria has around 6 children, and
right,
that's compared to the average around the world. I think is like one.
right, wow,
I
wow,
think so,
wow.
but
Well,
but
this, yeah,
it's all based on this false idea that that the Earth has a capacity limit.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
sure, if you were to take 8 billion people and put them into the and transplant them to the Earth of 1860,
Right.
yeah, the Earth would not be able to feed 8 billion people.
Mhm.
But as more and more and more people populate the planet, two things happen. One, there are technological advantages, or technological innovations that
Mhm.
allow us to be able to be more productive,
Yeah.
and two, you have more people on the planet that can work,
Exactly.
that can work as stewards on the planet
Right.
to bring about more resources, to make more resources available, to
Right.
more farmers to farm more food and stuff like that.
Right. Right.
And that is the part of the equation that these people that are thinking in the line of that brain dead egghead Thomas Malthus, that's the thing that they don't understand, and that
Right.
they'll never be able to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just to put into focus what you were saying, she says here, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, has projected Africa's share of global population to grow to 25% in 2050 and to
Wow.
39% in 2100. Yeah, and to 39% in 2100.1. Much of this growth would be the result of phenomenal fertility of women in sub-Saharan Africa. This population boom could, under the right conditions, form the base of a formidable workforce and tax base that, if well managed and leveraged, could make Africa the world's largest market and dominant player in the global economy. Right. So,
Mhm.
you do see sort of a it's almost like this, you know, uh it's almost like a biblical story, where they talk
Yeah.
about, like, when you think about Egypt in the Exodus, and how the Pharaoh says, let's kill all the firstborn because their population is growing, right? And and of course, the biblical story is the story that becomes sort of the dominant narrative within our religious traditions, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm just thinking here, like, when we talk about Africa in terms of Christianity and family, all these things, right? You have a traditional family, they have traditional religious practice, and things like that. You know, is it a fear of knowing that this population, or these groups of people are going to overturn some of the things that have been proselytized in the West? And I think that and also I mean, maybe, on an economic level, it's like they also know that they'll be sort of outperformed, right? Because there, like you said, there's a lot of labor there, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think African, in this context, from what I've read, Africans do have a deep respect for large families, you know, and that corresponds with the Bible, right? The
Yeah.
Old Testament, in Psalms, I believe it says, blessed is the man whose quiver is full, you know. So they're in step with what the Bible is teaching. But I wonder why the West is on this whole thing of trying to derail that, and I know it's more like they don't want to be, should I say, beholden to Africa? I don't know. I mean, and are they afraid that the wealth of Africa and these African politicians and stuff like that are going to keep keep their wealth to themselves, and sort of it's going to be like a reciprocal thing? You know what I mean? Like, whatever you did to us, we're
Mhm.
going to do to you. Do you think there's a certain level of, they're
Well,
scared of
so
retaliation?
I think they can see that the winds are changing, and that,
Right.
so if you go back to the 19th century, Great Britain was the workshop of the world, you know,
Right. Right.
and because of that privilege that they held, that gave them the ability to exercise a lot of influence over the world, and to kind of help to organize and infuse their values into a whole bunch of societies all over the planet.
Mhm.
Then after World War II, the British Empire was done, the United States became the workshop of the world. Same thing happened here. Then the United States exported our values like democracy and all kinds of stuff all over the world. Then in the 80s, and into the 90s, and now China became the workshop of the world. And now it's a whole thing between China and the United States over who is going to dominate, being able to infuse their values, unquestioned all over the world. So, and you can see that China's on the move right now because the winds have blown into their sail. Well, I think what a lot of these NGOs and a lot of these entrenched elites can see is decades down the road. It's not even a century. It's just a matter of decades. The wind's going to be blowing into Africa's sail, and they know that Africa as a continent or as a multiplicity of countries, however it ends up being organized, and it would be a fool's errand for us to try to predict it right now. That Africa will be in a position where they can export and infuse their values around the world. And it just so happens that the values held by most people in Africa, Africa predominantly being Christian and Muslim, right? They're, and Christians and Muslims, they don't agree on everything, but right. They do agree on some things. They're very family oriented people. Right. They both hold to an idea that there's a certain minimum dignity that every single person is entitled to in their lives. Right. And the thing, and I think that's very different from the value that the United States and China both kind of hold the same core idea that prosperity is the ultimate value. That ultimately prosperity is your metric of success. Right. And I came away from this book thinking that obviously Africans do, value prosperity. It's not like they don't, but they value a lot of other things at the same level, and that's quality of life, family, and community.
Right. Right. And so you think that by the West trying to prioritize monetary value or, financial climbing up the ladder is what we're promoting, the most, right? And then telling people like, well, if you have less children, if you have less, debts on you, and having children is quote unquote like a debt, that you'll be much more successful in life, right? If you adopt sort of our values about freedom as an individual, you will be more successful in life, right? If you reject, the religious values, you would be more successful, right? So, and if going back to this thing of, having babies, right? Or having more children, right? She talked about in her book, we're seeing that a decline in the Western world of child growth, right? Or having more children. And she says, a case in point is Japan, a nation with an unprecedented, rapidly aging and declining population. Although the population size is not as much of a concern in Europe and the United States because of immigration, which Japan does not want to increase, these places too are experiencing so-called graying of their populations. Upside down family trees with more elderly people than young people are commonplace. As a result, the unavoidable fate of many old people is the nursing home, where loneliness, neglect, and even abuse are rampant, right? So we're already seeing sort of the effects of a depopulated nation, and what happens, there, right? You have all these old people. There's not enough people to take care of them. Of course, they go to the nursing home where they're treated, badly, right? You don't have a labor force. People are not, so what happens to a country after something like that? Does it go into more debt? First of all, here's my question, man. Has anything ever if you know of anything historically, have we ever seen a large scale depopulation of a country like that, or is this sort of the first time in our history? I mean, besides like wars and the conflicts, right? We're talking about sort of a willingness to sort of depopulate the nation. Have you ever?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
But if we're looking to places like, if we look at Japan as an example, for instance, I think there's a really close correlation between the Japanese, rejecting their traditional culture in place of kind of like the Americanized culture where they say prosperity is the ultimate metric of success.
Mhm.
You know, babies are expensive. Kids are expensive. I'm not a parent, but
Yeah.
that is what I have been told.
Yeah, it's true.
But
I am, so I can tell you it's true.
okay, so you are telling me, but
Yeah.
yeah, but the thing is, I think if you are, I think if you look at Japan,
Mhm.
and you see that prosperity and this whole idea of pursuing your personal career path,
Mhm.
is the ultimate measure, or it is the ultimate metric that you're supposed to measure your success by. It's
Mhm.
not by your community, it's not by your family, it's that the metric doesn't involve anybody else.
Mhm.
It's this very self-serving, autistic, point of view that that um that the that just kind of like the Western culture has infused into our minds. and
Yeah.
and and China has that same type of outlook too. It's this obsession with the economics. It's this obsession
Right.
with your material good. It's materialism,
Right. Right.
and I think there are many things at play here, but
Mhm.
I see the primary thing between the West and Africa as being materialism versus non-materialism.
Wow. Yeah. Right. I mean, get talking about economic, and material
Uh-huh.
gain, right? We were talking about, the economic side to this, right? Like how it affects Africa on a financial level, right? And she had a chapter in there about, aid and everything. And I don't remember verbatim everything she said, right? But she was very, she was somewhat critical of, African nations that were taking aid, from you know nonprofit organizations and all these NGOs and everything like that. And she was talking about, how they're indebted to these organizations and to these countries when they keep supplying them with money. And and of course these leaders in Africa are taking the money for themselves, they're taking a portion for themselves, and stuff like that. So the money that actually doesn't get to the people, or the finances are not, given to the people. It's taken by the leader, right? And he's in cahoots with,
Yeah.
the French government, the British government, and things like that, right? And so, it's hard to even say, like, well, who's wrong in this, right? Like, who, I mean, of course it's easy to say, uh, the African leader is wrong, European leaders are wrong, right, for doing this, right? But how do the people, how are they able to sort of, speak for themselves and not be held under that sort of, manipulation, is what I want to say, you know.
Well, I just turned to the section of the book about aid, and I want
Right.
to I want to read a couple of things.
Okay.
Um, so this is just below the section where it says high dependency and addiction to aid.
Mhm.
In the first 40 years after independence, Africa received about $400 billion of aid from the developed world, about 6 times what the United States pumped into the reconstruction of Western Europe after World War II. Africa receives more than $50 billion from Western donors every year. Now, I'm skipping down a couple of lines. I thought this was very interesting. The per capita GDP of Africans, and just so that everyone knows, GDP is the total amount produced by the country each year, and then per capita means per head.
Okay.
So the per capita GDP of Africans living in sub-Saharan Africa declined at an average annual rate of 0.59% between 1975 and the year 2000. So that means that their purchasing power declined by about 0.59% or about 0.5% each year between 1975 and the year 2000. So it's a slow and steady. It's like the frog boiling in the pot, right?
Right.
So over that period, over that period, per capita GDP adjusted for purchasing power parity declined from $1,770 to $1,479. So you're looking at, that's roughly about between about a 15 and 20% decline in purchasing power over those years. That, you could think about it like, you could think about if your paycheck would buy you, if your paycheck would buy you about 80% today of what it would have bought you like 20 years ago. That's what we're dealing with here. It would be the equivalent of being able to afford to buy a pound of ground beef versus about 3/4 of a pound of ground beef, and that's your limit. Like that's a very difficult thing, especially when you're dealing with a place that was just coming out of colonialism, who was prevented from being able to develop their own native industries. Because remember that the whole system of colonialism was designed to extract raw resources from the colonies and bring those raw resources to factories that would be in Europe, France, the United States, wherever, and then those countries would turn those resources into something, and then those countries would sell those the finished goods around the world.
Right.
So at most, the industries that would have been developed in Africa would have been things like mines and farms and stuff like that.
Oil.
Like oil extraction. It wouldn't have been things like the factories to turn to turn like carbon into steel. It wouldn't have been the factories like, it wouldn't have really been refineries to turn oil into gasoline. And so the problem is that you had this very lopsided situation that the continent found themselves in at the end of colonization.
Right. It's like they have, the same thing with like the diamonds and stuff, right? Like they have the natural resources. They're allowed to extract them. Like they're allowed to work to extract them, right? But they're not allowed to actually profit off of it, because it goes to these like De Beers or something like that. These small or these big, like I don't even know what they are. Big company, big companies. You know what I mean? That have people in there refining these rocks and things like that, and they sell them at high prices. But there's no benefit for that for places like the Congo or something like that. I mean, they don't get anything out of that. And I'm wondering, because so here's the thing, right? Like we talked a little bit about how sort of, progressives or the left or people, who are on the left tend to kind of, they're on the mark, right? They have the they see the surface, right?
Yeah.
But they don't really have a good grasp.
And I think in most cases their heart is genuinely in the right place when you're talking about colonialism and stuff.
Right. And I think so too. I mean, I think that they have a I think that they have an understanding, but it's also it's very riddled with sort of past injustices, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really focus on what's going on now and like the present moment. So it's more this, they don't see that they don't see the they don't see the racism in sort of the of wanting to have population control, and family planning. To them, that's sort of well, that's what we should be doing because that keeps people from being in poverty,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, no, that's the exact opposite because what you're telling them is that, they shouldn't hold on to their values, which has given them successes for so long and it's kept their families and culture and everything intact, and you're telling them to go do something else, which we've already seen. We're seeing the results of that in our own countries. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? We're seeing the sort of the failures of that phenomenon in our own country, and we're not, and but we're still trying to pass that along to other people. And that's the thing that always, was sort of strange to me. It's like, they have the right intention, but they don't have, you know the right information. Maybe it's because, they're not as economically inclined like me or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like they don't know. They can't. You know they're not good with numbers or something like that. I don't know, but
I'll give you an example, and I can't remember this woman's name, but she's an entrepreneur from Kenya,
mhm,
and I remember I watched an interview that she gave like probably 2 or 3 years ago,
mhm,
and she was talking about how the approach that the world should have toward toward foreign aid, especially when it
mhm,
comes to Africa,
mhm.
their mantra should be do no harm,
Right,
first and foremost.
right,
Do good.
right,
If you can genuinely do good and you can
right,
offer a helping hand, do it. But
right,
do not do things that can cause harm, or even downstream cause harm. Now, she talked about mosquito nets.
right.
She said that mosquito nets are dumped onto the African continent like nothing else.
Okay,
That do-gooders from all over the world are constantly sending. They have all these NGOs and charities and stuff, and they're constantly dumping mosquito nets and also like first aid kits and stuff like that, like just all over the continent. And
okay,
what she was saying was that it makes people in Western countries feel really good that they're sending mosquito nets to Africa. You know,
hmm,
and that there's a certain level that the mosquito nets are helpful in helping to prevent malaria and stuff. But
right,
what she talked about in that interview was how there used to be a mosquito net industry in Africa.
hmm,
It was a native industry.
hmm.
And the problem is, if you have an industry, you can't compete with free.
Well,
It does not matter.
yeah,
Doesn't matter how much you're able to lower your cost, but you can't compete with free.
right,
And
right,
this was an industry that employed fellow Africans
right,
at a factory, and they were able to manufacture their own mosquito nets, and
right,
they sold them locally, and they sold them all over the continent. In fact, they may have even exported some. I'm not sure about that.
yeah,
But what ended up happening was that industry in Africa, it collapsed because Western nations, they just started dumping mosquito nets onto the continent, thinking that they're doing good.
right,
Now, was she saying, and am I suggesting that no Western person should ever donate a mosquito net to an African? No, but the
right, of
thing
course
is,
not. Yeah,
when you're just flooding the market there with mosquito nets, and you're not considering the downstream harm of collapsing a native industry in Africa, and
right,
causing people that weren't in poverty to go into poverty, then
right,
then that's a problem. You're doing harm.
right, right,
And
right,
and
yeah,
and the same thing can be said about a lot of other forms of aid that are going to Africa.
hmm,
We see the good it's doing at the surface level, or at least the good that we think it's doing at the surface level, but what it's doing is it's doing downstream harm.
right,
Jesus said, teach a man to fish.
Right.
And you feed a man or you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime.
Right.
This would be a situation where you're putting a man in front of a fish fry buffet.
Right.
And if that's the case, he's never going to learn to fish.
Right.
It's
Right.
never
Right.
it's never going to happen. And
Right.
the thing is, Europe wouldn't be prosperous, and the rest of the world would not be prosperous if they were being flooded with items for free
Right.
in a way where anybody can get them for free. And
Right.
what ends up happening with a lot of free stuff that gets dumped into Africa, this happens with first aid kits, this happens with water filters, this
It
happens with
happens with NFL T-shirts that with the other team that lost,
yes.
they give those away. Did you?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, and what they do, they take them to markets and they sell them for next to nothing.
Hmm. Right.
And that was not the intended destination of those items
Right.
by the Western do-gooders. But the problem is that the do no harm was not the mantra.
Right. 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 Well, now here's the thing, because we're gonna lead this into uh, something a little more religious. You had mentioned not religious, but uh, spiritual and Christian.
Mhm.
Okay, you
Yep.
had mentioned this scripture from Leviticus 19, I believe, 35 to 36, and it says, "Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length,
Mm.
weight, or quantity. Use the honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt." And for anybody that wants to have any more information about what an ephah and a hin is, I'll tell you right now. An ephah was a dry measure having the capacity of about 3/5 of a bushel, or about 22 liters. I have no idea what that is. And a hin was a liquid measure having the capacity of about 1 gallon, or about 3.8 liters. So that's just, a little information. Anyways, again, this whole point about honesty with economics and finance seems to be, integral to the way in which, God wants us to deal with each other when it comes
Yes.
to, commerce and trade, right? And so, like you were saying, it's sort of a unlevel playing field, where in which, Africans don't have the leverage of their natural resources to use, because, there's sort of prohibitions against it or something,
Mhm.
you know, um, but, going forward, like on a, you know, with, uh, you know, Ekeocha Obianuju being, a Catholic, first, and, and being a, you know, someone who's done this research and studied these things. I think her first thing is that she's coming at this from a spiritual level, right? And like how this is, you know, uh, devastating, the African countries, right? On a spiritual level, because you are telling them, to go against the things that they were taught, you know, uh, religiously, right? And but the other component to that is this, man, like, what does the Catholic Church have to do in order to, you know, turn that around? You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like there's too much of a focus on what's happening in Africa when it comes to, the Holy See, and, things like that. I mean, we had talked previously
Yeah.
about one of the fathers in a particular African country who, was banned from basically giving mass and speaking out against some
I
of
think his
the
name was Father Mary Jesus.
Mary Jesus, Father Mary
Yes.
Jesus, right? And so, there's a lot of correlations to, what he's saying and what she was talking about, years back, right? And so once again, we're seeing sort of a that play out, in action at present.
Yeah.
All these things that are coming up, and so, you know, I'm just wondering, are we going to see a shift in tone, right? Um, with His Holiness, or um,
God
is
willing.
he going to? Yeah, you know what I mean. Because I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, okay, there's a lot of speaking out. Okay, I'm going to put it like this. He reminds me of the spokes. He reminds me of a spokesperson for. He says the same things that the left says. You know what I mean? He
Yeah.
talks about poverty and we shouldn't be doing it. You know what I mean? And so he has this sort of, you know, like, let's all be Franciscans. His namesake. You know what I mean? Let's
Yeah.
all be Franciscans. But it's like, well, okay, but there's this other thing going on here, and you never said, you never. I haven't really heard him say anything really much about these issues that she brings up, as far as, the culture and what's going on socially and economically and politically and religiously. You know, sh I haven't heard him talk much about family planning. How I have to keep getting that right because I'm not used to that term. But
Yeah.
it's just, it's confusing because you don't know if he's going to actually turn in that direction and start speaking about that, or if he's going to remain, sort of in this uh, sort of, I'm just going to talk about what's going on a global level. Let's just all find peace, and let me keep talking about Ukraine, and let me go hang out with the chiefs in Canada, or I'm having the Pachamama in Rome. It's and again, I think that sends a lot of mixed messages to people who are trying, want to live a devout, Catholic lifestyle. And it seems to be the truth, that's true for most, um, Catholics living in Africa. So, just with the fact, that Africa is going to have a growing population, if, you know, organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you know, haven't already, you know, derailed that program, you know what I mean? Then that's going to be sort of a reckoning for the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're going to have to listen to the majority. You know what I mean? You
Oh
have to
yeah.
listen to the majority. And I would say, I encourage all African Catholics to keep up what they're doing, and be in resistance to, what is being said and what is being, proselytized, and all this, hyperbole about depopulation and stuff. Forget those people, man. You know what I mean? Because the one thing I would, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, the one thing I would say is, like you were talking about earlier, where, there is a, I think there are other outcomes, when you engage in sort of, this family planning, depopulation type stuff, right? Like, for one, you know like we were talking about the labor force, you're not going to have as many workers, people are not going to be able to work and stuff like that, right? Or, there won't be enough I don't know, enough jobs, what have you. But my thing is that, Africa having, more, a bigger population, and all of that, right? That's going to lead to economic successes for them, right? We need to, as Americans, I think, learn that, learning examples from them, right? Or at least try to restore that culture, that value of family and religion and faith, right? And, you know, because for me, it's like, what you were saying earlier, which was, you were talking about how, like, Christmas Day, right? Or like Christmas
Mhm.
Eve, the holidays, and, you know, um, feast days and things like that, right? How they've sort of become unimportant, to our day and age, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, uh, you know, I was telling you, like, the feast of Saint Ambrose was on December 7th, right?
Hmm.
The Feast of the Immaculate Conception was the next day. Now I didn't even know that, bro. Like honestly, I'm telling you, like I didn't know that St. Ambrose had a feast day on December 7th. I didn't know Immaculate Conception was December 8th because you know we were always taught that Christmas is just sort of like a day that it's a month to where you basically can just be lazy and eat as much food as you want
Yep.
and
Just
get
eat a bunch
gifts.
of gingerbread cookies and
Yeah,
candy
you know,
canes.
right. And you do as much as you want, and whatever, go work out the next day, next week
Put
or
on a
something. I don't
Santa
know,
hat and
right. Drink as much eggnog. So we were kind of conditioned or taught to believe that like Christmas is all about the individual.
yeah,
It's all about me, right? Like you were saying, like it's all about what I want. It's all material, right? And and so when you read, a short book like this, it reminds you of the value of something like like a holiday, like Christmas Eve, these feast days, right? Because it's to commemorate and to remember, right? The sacrifices that were made, but also, a time for families to get together and sort of ponder and contemplate and be thankful, that they have an opportunity to celebrate, the birth of Christ and things like that. And that's a joyous occasion. Or like when she was talking about, when a mother, has a baby in Africa, in Nigeria, where in the region where she's from, they sing Gloria. Yeah, it's called Gloria, in
yeah,
excelsis something,
yes,
and so, she was saying that like every time they have a child, the women sing that song, and they're very, elated and stuff like that. And, you know, in the West, a lot of times, when we talk about having children, our response is, oh boy, you got to have another one, or, oh boy, you got to be in a whole world of trouble and stuff like that. And,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
and don't you think a lot of that is because the lens that we're looking at it through it's this materialistic
Yes,
economic lens, you
yes,
know?
yes, yes. And that I mean, and that I think is why it's so important to, when we have holidays like this, or we have Advent and things, to remind people, like that is what this whole thing is about. It's about bringing the family together and, being on one accord and, spending time with each other and stuff like that. That's all a part of, you know African culture, and I think we can learn a great deal from that. You know what I mean?
Well, and you know what's interesting? So Karl Marx
Mhm.
is somebody we all know his name.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until a few years ago, which I was a history major just like you were, and so I read my more than my fair share of Marx, but when I was in school and I grew to disdain him. But it
Right.
wasn't until a few years ago that I really came to realize that at the end of the day, the reason that Marx was so revolutionizing was not necessarily because of him proposing communism. It was because he was the first one to come out and say, follow the money.
Mhm.
Money is the thing that matters. And he was the
Right.
first one to say the lens by which we should view reality, it's not through faith and family. It's
Uh-huh.
not through tradition. It's not through truth. It's not from a moral framework. It's from the point of view of money.
Right.
That money and money in the pursuit of power, that is the primary motivator for all human beings.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so that's something that I often think about in my own mind whenever I'm reading something. I'm thinking, oh well obviously this person's motivation was purely money. Oh, this person's
Mhm.
motivation was purely the pursuit of power. I start thinking to myself, am I reading this as a Marxist,
Mhm.
or am I reading this as a Christian?
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
something for all of us to think about, because it's something that it's been so heavily ingrained in our minds to view reality through the lens of materialism, particularly,
Mhm.
money and the pursuit of power. And
Right.
that is Marxism.
Right.
Plain
Right.
and simple. you know,
Right.
and that's something I think for all of us to be on guard against.
Yeah. Do, now, do you think that underneath that it's kind of like, okay, we say, well, that person just wants money. That person is just looking after themselves. Whatever. Do you think that you know do you think that underneath that, this idea of like wealth and stuff, it's actually envy? It's sort of like a jealousy or something like that. Like, oh, well, you have it, I don't have it, and then I'm gonna say, well, it's because you did this thing, or what have you. I mean, and I mean, I understand that, in a sense, like, we're as humans, we're all envy. We carry envy. We
Hmm.
carry jealousy, right? It's what, like, one of the deadly seven deadly sins, or something
Yeah.
like that, I believe. Yeah. And so, um perhaps that is what, um prompts, say, these African leaders and stuff like that to, you know forego doing for their people, or, or even European nations to sort of turn a blind eye to the corruption that is going on in Africa, and the corruption that they engage in. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because it's the pursuit of money, and it's sort of an envy that they have. Maybe the Europeans are envious of Africans for having natural resources, right? And then African leaders are sort of envious of, Europeans for having power, or
Well,
having.
and one thing that I would add to that is the Europeans, especially the English and French speaking Europeans, they
Mm,
successfully figured out in the late 1800s how to structurally control people that are resource rich, and that is
right,
through controlling money and credit. Um,
right,
I want to drop one stat.
okay,
So, and this comes from a woman. She's a Harvard trained economist named Susan George,
yeah,
and she is I think she is I think she considers herself a neoliberal, but she's very much opposed to what we call neoliberalism today. Like she was very
mhm,
much against like neocolonialism and all that type of stuff. And I'm sorry
mhm.
if I'm using too much jargon here, but
No, sorry.
but she did, and she was truly one of a kind, and I have had a lot of trouble finding someone like her. She followed the money,
Okay,
like a good Marxist, and
right,
she and she said that she discovered, as of this was like as of 2012 or 13, every minute, now this is every minute that passes by, and I'm sure
mhm,
this number has grown, I'm sure it has not shrunk. Every minute sub-Saharan Africa racks up an additional $25,000 in interest on the debt that they owe to the wealthiest countries of the world.
well,
Now the thing is, bear in mind that the money that was lent to them was printed from nothing.
mhm,
It was fake money. They call them SDRs, special
okay,
drawing rights, that are issued by the I think they're issued by the World Bank. Um, and what ends up happening is that money, it gets lent out to countries, and then when the countries can't pay,
mhm,
um, the World Bank, or a lot of the time the International Monetary Fund, they roll in there and they start bossing the country around, and they call it austerity measures. And what they
okay,
tell them
right,
is they say, look, you're broke, you can't pay us back the money that you owe us, so we're going to ask you to suspend democracy, and we're gonna tell you how to run your country. And
wow,
they run it like a big plantation. And what they do
yeah,
is they go in there and they tell them, they say, your farmers are not allowed to grow um, too many food crops. We want your farmers growing things that are cash crops, like cotton, tobacco, indigo. We want them growing things that they can sell on the market for cash, so that you guys can pay us back.
right,
And the same thing happened in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka
okay,
had borrowed too much money. There were austerity measures. And then what the IMF told Sri Lanka was, okay, what we need you to do is go green. We don't want you using any more fertilizers and all this other stuff. And again,
Right.
it's like, screw democracy, you know? So that ended up causing the crisis that ensued in Sri Lanka recently.
Okay.
And the same
Right.
thing, it happens over and over and over again. Whenever you see austerity measures, and you see that a lot of the time associated in the headlines with African countries, that's where the warning light should flash red for you. Because
Right.
that means that democracy in that country is being suspended, and these
Wow.
people from DC or from Switzerland are going down there, either from the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or United Nations or whoever, and they're going to go down there and they're going to tell those people top down, this is how we are going to intervene, and we're going to tell you how to plan your economy. And what that means
Wow.
is
Yeah.
the average everyday person at the bottom end of the totem pole who's just trying to live their life, who's just trying to be a good parent, that means that they have to go without because of a failure of leadership that goes all the way up to the top. But
Wow.
but I want for you to think about something. It's not just about creating poverty in these countries, but part of it is, if you can keep these people in poverty and in confusion, you can keep them from developing native industries in their country.
Mm.
If you can divert farmers away from growing a surplus amount of food, then and you can cause and you can prevent surpluses from accumulating around the local economy, then
Yeah.
with a lack of surplus, those people will not be able to truly invest in building out industries and building out
Right.
businesses to
Right.
be able to compete on the world market for profits. you
Wow.
know
Wow.
um
Yeah.
so what you do is you create poverty and confusion through these
Mhm.
austerity measures, and
Okay.
that's what ends up
Right.
happening time and time again. And
Right.
I've and you do have to, and we do have to give credit where credit is due. A lot of progressives are against these Neanderthal austerity measures. A
Right.
lot of them, they're much more vocal than anybody else in opposition to them. But what gets them is the World Bank and IMF and stuff. They'll say, well,
Mhm.
we'll throw in some green austerity measures. We're going to demand that these people stop digging for coal and
Mhm.
start building windmills and stuff. And then a lot of progressives, then some, not all of them, but then a lot of progressives are like, well, I'm okay with that.
Right. The
But
stuff that doesn't
it's
work.
still creating poverty nonetheless. And what it does,
Right.
it prevents industry from developing in that part of the world, right at the doorstep of all these raw resources like oil,
Right.
coal, and all these other things.
Gold. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, gold and
Hmm.
all kinds of stuff, because the
Yeah.
order that they want to maintain in the world is one where in places like Africa and South America and all these other places that are very, very resource rich, they don't want industry to accumulate there, because that will compete with the industry in Europe and the United States and even in places
Right.
like China, you know?
Right. Right. Right.
And I think
Right.
that's what scares them about Africa is
Yeah.
is that Africa has the resources, they have the labor to be able to turn those
Hmm.
resources into the finished products. And then on
Right.
top of it, Africa has something that that China does not have. Africa has the Christian values,
Amen.
has the family values that they would more than happily export and infuse into the rest of the world.
Amen. I'm not,
You know?
we're gonna end with that, brother. That that was a good sermon right there. I like that.
Oh,
That's cool,
yeah.
man. Yeah, no, I'm gonna end with this last quote that she said, and this is in her introduction.
Mhm.
She said, "There have been many afflictions and much friction brought about by a number of complex factors, including corruption in high places, greed at all levels, and natural and unnatural disasters. Many would describe post-colonial Africa as a poor and plagued continent. But as the late Ahmed Sekou Toure of Guinea famously said to the French general Charles de Gaulle, we prefer poverty in liberty to riches in slavery."
Amen.
Anything about that, right? That's a good one. Well, hey, brother.
It's beautiful.
Hey, man. This was very informative, bro.
Well,
And
I'd love for us to revisit this topic again in the future.
me too. Hopefully we can get her on and talk with her. You know, over Zoom. So
Oh,
yeah,
that would be
man.
wonderful.
Yeah. Well, hey, bro, let's do it again, man. Our next talk. Hopefully, we can get something about Christmas in, right? We can do
Yeah.
something with that. I don't know.
Oh, that would be great, Shannon.
Yeah. All right, brother. Good talking to you, man.
All right, brother. You too.